Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible true story that'll leave you speechless, make sure to hit that subscribe button because stories like this one are exactly what we bring you every week. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to share this with someone who loves historical mysteries as much as you do. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this journey to the very end. Now let me take you back to 1841. To a place where nightmares were born and legends were forged in blood and desperation. My name is Mara, and I'm probably the only person left alive who knows what really happened in Natchez during those 2 terrifying years. I was just 6 years old when it all began, but some memories burn so deep into your soul that time can never erase them. Today, I'm 76, and I've carried this secret for 7 decades. But before I die, the world needs to know the truth about my brothers Elias and Jonah, and about the 7 families that disappeared from our county. People called us monsters. They said we were the devil's children, born with murder in our hearts. They were wrong about everything except one thing: we were dangerous, but not for the reasons they thought. The Whitmore plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of Mississippi soil, and every inch of it was soaked with our blood, sweat, and tears. Master Whitmore owned 237 souls, and we were just 3 numbers in his ledger. Elias was 21, strong as an ox, with hands that could break a man's neck, but were gentle enough to braid my hair every morning. Jonah was 17, quick as lightning, with eyes that missed nothing and a smile that could charm the birds from the trees when he had reason to smile, which wasn't often. I was the problem child, too small for field work, too young for house duties, too smart for my own good. Master Whitmore called me worthless cargo and threatened daily to sell me to the sugar plantations down in Louisiana, where children like me disappeared into the cane fields and were never seen again. Our days began before sunrise with the crack of Overseer Morrison's whip. Not on our backs, not yet, but in the air above our heads, a promise of what would come if we moved too slowly. Elias worked the cotton fields, his back already crisscrossed with scars that told the story of every time he'd been too slow, too defiant, or simply in the wrong place when Morrison needed someone to hurt. Jonah worked in the stables, caring for horses that were treated better than we were. Those animals had names, regular meals, and shelter from the rain. We had numbers, scraps, and whatever protection we could give each other. I spent my days in the kitchen, supposedly helping cook Martha, but mostly staying out of sight. The white children of the house, Master Whitmore's twin boys, Thomas and William, delighted in tormenting me. They'd trip me when I carried water, hide my food, and tell their father lies about things I'd supposedly done or said. But the worst part wasn't the hunger, the exhaustion, or even the constant threat of violence. It was watching my brothers slowly break under the weight of protecting me. Every morning, I saw a little more light fade from Elias's eyes. Every evening, I noticed Jonah's hands shake a little more as he helped me wash the day's dirt from my face. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. I remember because it was the day after Master Whitmore's birthday celebration, and the whole house still reeked of whiskey and cigar smoke. Thomas and William were bored, looking for entertainment, and I was the easiest target they could find. I was sweeping the front porch when Thomas grabbed the broom from my hands. "Stupid little monkey," he laughed, pushing me backward. "Can't even sweep properly." William joined in, and soon they had me cornered against the porch railing. They were both 12, twice my size, and they knew exactly how far they could push before their father would intervene, which was much further than anyone should be allowed to push a 6-year-old child. "Maybe we should teach her some manners," Thomas said, picking up a riding crop that had been left on the porch chair. That's when Elias appeared. I don't know how he knew I was in trouble. Maybe it was the way brothers always know when their family is in danger. Maybe it was luck. But suddenly, he was there, climbing the porch steps with mud still caked on his boots from the fields. "Step away from my sister," he said quietly. The boys laughed. "Your sister?" William sneered. "You don't have a sister. You have property, and so do we." Elias took another step forward. I said, "Step away." Thomas raised the riding crop. "You forget your place, boy. Maybe you need a reminder." What happened next changed everything. Thomas brought that crop down toward my face, and Elias caught his wrist in mid-air. For a moment, nobody moved. A slave had just laid hands on a white child. In Mississippi in 1841, that was a death sentence. But Elias didn't let go. Instead, he squeezed until Thomas dropped the crop and cried out in pain. "Touch her again," Elias said, his voice deadly calm, "and I'll break more than your wrist." He released Thomas and stepped back, but the damage was done. The boys ran inside, screaming for their father, and within minutes the entire plantation was in chaos. Master Whitmore came storming out with Morrison and 3 other overseers. They had ropes, chains, and the kind of cold fury in their eyes that meant someone was going to die today. "You dare lay hands on my sons?" Whitmore roared. Elias stood straight, shoulders back, ready to face whatever came next. "I protected my family, sir, same as you would." The whip came down across his back so hard it tore his shirt clean through, then again and again. But Elias never cried out, never fell, never took his eyes off Whitmore's face. That's when I knew we were all going to die on this plantation. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The look in Master Whitmore's eyes wasn't just anger, it was the look of a man who decided we were too dangerous to keep alive. As they dragged Elias away to the punishment shed, he caught my eye and mouthed 2 words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Be ready." That night, as Jonah tended to Elias's wounds in our cabin, we made our first real plan. Not to escape. That seemed impossible, but to survive long enough to find a way out. We had no idea that within a week, the first of the 7 families would disappear, and our names would become whispered in fear throughout Natchez County. We had no idea that we were about to become the most hunted fugitives in Mississippi. And we had no idea that the real monsters weren't the 3 scared children huddled together in a slave cabin. They were the people who'd created us. Chapter 2. The First Confrontation. 3 days after Elias's beating, the plantation felt different. Conversations stopped when we walked by. Overseers watched us with hands resting on their whips. Even the other slaves kept their distance, afraid that whatever curse had fallen on us might spread to them. Master Whitmore had made his decision about our fate. I could see it in the way he looked at us during the morning roll call. We were marked for death, but he was waiting for the right excuse, the perfect justification that would let him sleep peacefully after murdering 3 children. That excuse came sooner than any of us expected. It was a Saturday evening, and the Whitmore family was hosting the Ashfords for dinner. Richard Ashford owned the plantation next to ours, and his son Marcus was everything Thomas and William aspired to be. Cruel, entitled, and completely convinced that people like us existed solely for his entertainment. I was serving water in the dining room when Marcus noticed me. He was 16, tall and lean, with the kind of cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "if it isn't the little savage who's been causing so much trouble." Master Whitmore laughed nervously. "Now, Marcus, she's just a child. A child who needs to learn her place," Marcus replied, standing up from his chair. "I heard about what happened with Thomas and William. Someone should have taught her proper respect years ago." I kept my eyes down, focusing on pouring water without spilling it. But my hands were shaking and Marcus noticed. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he commanded. I raised my eyes to meet his, and what I saw there made my blood freeze. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was something darker, hungrier. Marcus enjoyed causing pain in a way that went beyond anything I'd experienced before. "That's better," he said, reaching out to grab my chin. "You know, you're almost pretty for a little monkey. In a few years you might be worth something after all." The implication in his words was clear, and it made my stomach turn. I tried to step back, but his grip tightened. "Please, sir," I whispered. "I need to finish serving." Marcus laughed. "You need to learn manners first." That's when he slapped me. It wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it was hard enough to send the water pitcher crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass filled the dining room, and suddenly everyone was staring at us. "Clumsy little beast," Marcus said. "Someone should teach you to be more careful." He raised his hand again, but this time it never came down. Jonah had appeared in the doorway like a ghost. He moved so quietly that none of us had heard him coming, but suddenly he was there, his hand wrapped around Marcus's wrist. "I think she's learned enough for one evening," Jonah said softly. The dining room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. A 17-year-old slave had just physically stopped a white man from striking a child, and everyone in that room knew what it meant. Marcus's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. "How dare you touch me, you filthy—" He never finished the sentence. Jonah's other hand came up and covered Marcus's mouth, cutting off his words. "I think," Jonah said, his voice still eerily calm, "that you should sit down and finish your dinner." For a moment that felt like an eternity. Nobody moved. Then Marcus tried to pull away, and Jonah's grip tightened. Not enough to hurt him, just enough to make it clear that he could hurt him if he chose to. "Jonah." Elias's voice came from behind me. He'd entered through the kitchen door, probably drawn by the sound of breaking glass. "Let him go." Jonah looked at his older brother, then back at Marcus. "He was hurting Mara." "I know," Elias said, "but this isn't the way." Slowly, reluctantly, Jonah released Marcus's wrist and stepped back. Marcus stumbled backward, his face a mask of humiliation and fury. "You're all dead," he whispered. "All three of you. I'll make sure of it." Master Whitmore finally found his voice. "Boys, get back to your quarters immediately. We'll deal with this tomorrow." But as we filed out of the dining room, I caught a look that passed between Elias and Jonah. It was the same look they'd shared the night after Elias's beating. The look of two people who just realized they were out of options. We didn't go back to our cabin. Instead, Elias led us to the old tobacco barn on the far edge of the property. It had been abandoned for years, and nobody ever went there after dark. "They're going to kill us," Jonah said as soon as we were safely inside. "You know that, right? Maybe not tonight, but soon." Elias nodded grimly. "Marcus won't let this go, and Master Whitmore can't afford to look weak in front of the Ashfords." "So what do we do?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. My brothers looked at each other for a long moment. Then Elias knelt down in front of me and took my hands in his. "Mara," he said gently, "how would you feel about taking a long trip?" I knew what he meant. Escape. Running away. It was every slave's dream and every slave's nightmare, because the punishment for getting caught was worse than death. "Where would we go?" I asked. "North," Jonah said. "There are people who help folks like us. Places where we could be free." "But it's dangerous," Elias added. "Very dangerous. And if we get caught—" He didn't need to finish. We all knew what happened to runaway slaves. "I'm not afraid," I lied. "If we're together, I'm not afraid of anything." That night, we made our plans. We would wait for the right moment, probably during the next new moon, when the darkness would hide our escape. We would take only what we could carry, follow the North Star, and pray that we could make it to freedom before the dogs caught our scent. But fate had other plans for us. The next morning, Marcus Ashford was found dead in his bed. There were no signs of violence, no obvious cause of death. He'd simply stopped breathing sometime during the night. The doctor said it was his heart, a rare condition that sometimes struck young men without warning, but the timing was too convenient, too perfect. Within hours, rumors were spreading throughout Natchez County. The 3 slave children who defied Marcus Ashford had somehow caused his death. Maybe through poison, maybe through some kind of dark magic, maybe through sheer force of will. The truth was much simpler and much more terrifying. Marcus Ashford had died of natural causes, but in a world where slaves weren't allowed to defend themselves, even coincidence looked like murder. By noon, the first search party had formed. By evening, wanted posters with our descriptions were being nailed to trees throughout the county. We hadn't killed anyone, but that didn't matter. We were guilty of something much worse in the eyes of Natchez society. We'd forgotten our place, and now, whether we wanted to or not, we were about to become the most dangerous fugitives in Mississippi. Chapter 3. The Seven Who Fell. The morning after Marcus Ashford's death, our world exploded into chaos. I woke to the sound of dogs barking and men shouting, and for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. Then Elias's hand clamped over my mouth, and I realized the nightmare was real. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "They're searching every cabin." Through the gaps in our cabin walls, I could see torches moving in the darkness. Master Whitmore was leading a group of armed men from house to house, dragging families outside and demanding to know if anyone had seen us do anything suspicious. But we weren't in our cabin. Elias had insisted we sleep in the tobacco barn again, and that decision probably saved our lives. From our hiding place, we watched as they tore our home apart, looking for evidence of poison, weapons, or anything else that might explain Marcus's death. "This is insane," Jonah whispered. "He died of natural causes. Everyone knows that." Elias shook his head grimly. "Doesn't matter what really happened. They need someone to blame, and we're perfect targets." He was right. In the 3 days that followed, the story of Marcus's death grew more elaborate with each telling. Some people said we'd poisoned his wine. Others claimed we'd used voodoo curses learned from the old woman who lived in the swamp. The most creative rumors suggested we'd made a deal with the devil himself. None of it was true, but truth had stopped mattering the moment a white man died after confronting 3 slave children. We spent those 3 days hiding in abandoned buildings, stealing food when we could, and trying to figure out our next move. Escape seemed impossible now. Every road out of the county was being watched, and the reward for our capture had grown to $500, dead or alive. That's when the second death happened. Eleanor Ashford, Marcus's mother, was found at the bottom of her staircase on Thursday morning. The doctor said she'd fallen, probably while sleepwalking in her grief. But the timing was too convenient for the growing mob of vigilantes who'd appointed themselves our judges and executioners. 2 deaths in one family, I heard one of them say as we hid in the church bell tower. That's not coincidence, that's a curse. By Friday, the Ashford family's remaining members, Richard and his younger daughter Sarah, had packed their belongings and fled to relatives in Georgia. They left behind a plantation, 200 slaves, and a community convinced that 3 children possessed supernatural powers of murder. The 3rd death came on Sunday. James Morrison, the overseer who'd whipped Elias, was found dead in his bed. Heart failure, the doctor said, just like Marcus, but the mob wasn't interested in medical explanations anymore. "They're picking us off one by one," someone shouted during an impromptu town meeting we watched from the shadows. First the Ashford boy, then his mother, now Morrison. Who's next? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Over the next 2 weeks, 4 more people died. Thomas Whitmore, one of the twins who'd tormented me, drowned in the river during what should have been a simple fishing trip. Margaret Henley, wife of the county sheriff, died in her sleep. Dr. Patterson, who'd examined all the previous victims, suffered a stroke while treating a patient. And finally, Judge Crawford, who'd been organizing the manhunt for us, was thrown from his horse and broke his neck. 7 deaths in 3 weeks. 7 prominent white citizens, all connected to our case in some way. The mathematical impossibility of it was staggering, but mathematics meant nothing to a community gripped by supernatural terror. We had become the boogeyman of Natchez County, and the irony was that we'd never hurt anyone. We were 3 starving children, hiding in barns and abandoned houses, stealing scraps of food and trying not to freeze to death in the Mississippi winter. But in the minds of our pursuers, we were demons capable of striking down our enemies from miles away. The truth was much more mundane and much more tragic. 7 people had died of natural causes in a short period of time, the kind of statistical cluster that happens occasionally in any community. But in a world where slaves weren't supposed to have the power to defend themselves, even coincidence looked like supernatural revenge. "They're going to kill every slave in the county if this keeps up," Jonah said, as we huddled together in an abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. He was right. The paranoia had spread beyond us to the entire slave population. Families were being separated, sold off, or simply murdered by vigilantes who saw potential conspirators everywhere. "We have to do something," I said. "People are dying because of us. People are dying because of fear and stupidity," Elias corrected. "But you're right. We can't let this continue." That's when he told us about the Underground Railroad. He'd heard whispers about it for years, a network of people, both black and white, who helped slaves escape to freedom in the North. There were safe houses, secret routes, and conductors who risked their lives to guide fugitives to safety. "There's supposed to be a station near the river," he said. "A house with a lantern in the window and a woman who helps people like us." "Supposed to be?" Jonah asked skeptically. "It's our only chance," Elias replied. "We can't keep hiding forever, and we can't go back. The only way forward is north. But first, we had to survive long enough to find this mysterious safe house, and that was becoming more difficult every day." The search parties were getting more organized, more desperate, and more violent. They'd brought in professional slave catchers with trained dogs and years of experience hunting human beings. The reward had grown to $1,000. More money than most people in Natchez County would see in a lifetime. Worse, they'd started taking hostages. Other slave families were being tortured for information about our whereabouts. Children younger than me were being whipped until they confessed to crimes they'd never committed. "We're not just running for our lives anymore," Elias said, as we watched smoke rise from another burned cabin. "We're running for our souls." That night, as we prepared to make our desperate journey to the river, I asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "Do you think we really killed them?" I whispered. "Marcus and the others, maybe without meaning to." Elias pulled me close and looked into my eyes. "Mara, listen to me very carefully. We are not killers. We are not monsters. We are 3 children who wanted to protect each other, and the world decided that made us dangerous. But 7 people died. 7 people died because people die," Jonah interrupted. "Every day in every town, people die of heart attacks and accidents and strokes. The only difference is that this time, someone needed someone to blame." He was right, but it didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. 7 families had been destroyed, and our names were written on every gravestone. Whether we'd actually killed anyone or not, we were responsible for the fear that was tearing Natchez County apart. As we prepared to leave our hiding place and make our way to the river, I made a promise to myself. If we survived this, if we made it to freedom, I would spend the rest of my life making sure the world knew the truth about what happened in Natchez in 1841. I would tell them about the 7 who fell and about the 3 children who became legends for all the wrong reasons. But first, we had to make it through the night. Chapter 4. The Pact of the Dark River. The Mississippi River had never looked so beautiful or so terrifying as it did that night. Under the pale light of a crescent moon, its dark waters moved like liquid silver, carrying logs, debris, and the dreams of countless souls toward the Gulf of Mexico. Somewhere along its banks was our salvation, if we could find it before the dogs found us. We'd been traveling for 6 hours, moving through swampland and thick forest to avoid the main roads. My feet were bleeding inside my worn shoes, and Jonah had to carry me for the last 2 miles. But we were alive, and for the moment, that was enough. "There," Elias whispered, pointing to a cluster of lights in the distance. "That has to be it." The house sat on a bluff overlooking the river, isolated from its neighbors by thick groves of cypress trees. It was larger than most homes in the area, with a wraparound porch and multiple chimneys. But what caught our attention was the single lantern burning in an upstairs window, the signal we'd been told to look for. "How do we know it's safe?" Jonah asked. "Could be a trap." Elias studied the house for several minutes, watching for signs of movement or hidden watchers. "We don't know," he finally admitted, "but we're out of options. If we don't find help tonight, we'll be dead by morning." He was right. The search parties were closing in, and we could hear dogs barking in the distance. Our scent trail was getting stronger as exhaustion made us careless, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. "Stay here," Elias said. "I'll go first. If something goes wrong, you two run for the river." "No," I said firmly. "We stay together. That's what we promised." "Mara, we stay together," I repeated. "All three of us, or none of us." Elias looked at Jonah, who nodded in agreement. "She's right. We've come this far as a family. We finish it as a family." So together we approached the house. The woman who answered our quiet knock was not what I'd expected. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through to our souls. But what surprised me most was that she was white. "You're the children from Natchez," she said without preamble. "I've been expecting you." "Ma'am," Elias said carefully. "My name is Ruth Caldwell," she said, stepping aside to let us enter. "And you're Elias, Jonah, and Mara, the three most wanted fugitives in Mississippi." We hesitated at the threshold. This could still be a trap, a way to collect the massive reward on our heads, but Mrs. Caldwell seemed to understand our fear. "Child," she said gently to me, "if I wanted to turn you in, I would have done it already. The sheriff's been here twice this week asking if I'd seen anything suspicious." "What did you tell him?" Jonah asked. "I told him the truth," she replied with a slight smile. "I said I hadn't seen anything suspicious at all. 3 children trying to stay alive isn't suspicious, it's natural." She led us into a warm kitchen where soup was already heating on the stove. As we ate the first real meal we'd had in weeks, Mrs. Caldwell explained how she'd become involved in the Underground Railroad. "My husband and I started helping people 20 years ago," she said. "After we lost our own children to yellow fever, we decided that every child deserved a chance at freedom. We've helped over 300 souls reach the north." "Your husband?" Elias asked, looking around the empty house. "Died last winter," she said simply, "but the work continues. It has to." As we ate, she told us about the route north. There were safe houses every 20 to 30 miles, marked by specific signals that changed regularly to avoid detection. The journey would take weeks, maybe months, and the dangers were enormous, but it was possible. "However," she said, her expression growing serious, "your situation is different from most. The entire state is looking for you. Your descriptions have been sent to every sheriff, every slave catcher, every bounty hunter from here to the Canadian border. So, what do you suggest?" Elias asked. "I suggest you disappear completely," she said. "New names, new identities, new story. As far as the world is concerned, Elias, Jonah, and Mara died in the swamps of Mississippi." She was right, of course. Our real names had become synonymous with murder and supernatural terror. Even if we reached the north, we'd never be safe as long as people knew who we really were. "What would our new names be?" I asked. Mrs. Caldwell smiled. "That's up to you, child. Who do you want to be?" It was a question I'd never considered before. For 6 years, I'd been nothing but property, a number in a ledger, a problem to be solved. The idea that I could choose my own identity was both thrilling and terrifying. "I want to be someone brave," I said finally. "Someone who isn't afraid." "Then you shall be," she said. "And your brothers." Elias and Jonah looked at each other, having the same silent conversation they'd been having all their lives. "We want to be brothers who protect their family," Elias said. "Nothing more, nothing less." Then that's exactly what you'll be. Mrs. Caldwell spent the next hour creating new identities for us. Elias became Samuel Freeman, a young man whose family had been freed by a dying master's will. Jonah became David Freeman, Samuel's younger brother, and I became Hope Freeman, their little sister. The Freeman family had been traveling north to find work when they'd been attacked by bandits. Only the 3 children had survived, and they were now seeking relatives in Ohio. It was a common enough story that it wouldn't attract attention, but tragic enough to explain why we had no documentation or possessions. "Remember," Mrs. Caldwell said, as she prepared forged papers for our new identities, "you are no longer the children who fled Natchez. Those children are dead. You are the Freeman family, and you have every right to seek freedom and safety." But even as she spoke, we could hear the sound of horses approaching. Through the window, we saw torches moving through the trees, a search party heading directly for the house. "Upstairs," Mrs. Caldwell said calmly. "There's a hidden room behind the bookshelf in my bedroom. Don't come out until I call for you." As we huddled in the cramped space behind the false wall, listening to boots stomping through the house below, I realized that this was our moment of truth. Either Mrs. Caldwell would protect us, or our journey would end here in betrayal and capture. The voices below were muffled, but I could make out enough to understand what was happening. Sheriff Henley was demanding to search the house. Mrs. Caldwell was politely refusing, citing her rights as a property owner. The argument went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, we heard the boots retreating and the horses riding away. Mrs. Caldwell called us down, and we found her sitting calmly at her kitchen table, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "They'll be back," she said matter-of-factly. "Probably with a warrant next time. We need to get you moving tonight." She gave us supplies, food, warm clothes, and most importantly, a detailed map showing the route to the next safe house. She also gave us something else, a small wooden cross that had belonged to her daughter. "For luck," she said, pressing it into my hands, "and to remind you that you're not alone in this world." As we prepared to leave, standing on the banks of the dark river that would guide us north, we made a pact. No matter what happened, no matter how difficult the journey became, we would never forget who we really were. We might be the Freeman family to the world, but to each other, we would always be Elias, Jonah, and Mara, 3 children who'd refused to let the world break them. "Together?" Elias asked, extending his hand. "Together," Jonah agreed, placing his hand on top. "Forever," I added, completing our circle. And with that promise binding us, we stepped into the darkness and began our journey toward freedom. Behind us, the lights of Mrs. Caldwell's house grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. Ahead of us lay hundreds of miles of dangerous territory, countless opportunities for capture and death, and the slim hope that somewhere in the north we might finally find peace. But we were no longer the terrified children who'd fled Natchez County. We were the Freeman family, and we were going home. Chapter 5. The Hunt in Natchez. The morning after we left Mrs. Caldwell's house, all hell broke loose in Natchez County. I didn't witness it firsthand, of course. We were already 20 miles north, following deer trails through dense forest. But years later, when I returned to research what had really happened during those terrible weeks, I learned the full scope of the madness that followed our disappearance. Sheriff Henley had indeed returned to Mrs. Caldwell's house with a warrant, only to find it empty except for the elderly woman calmly tending her garden. She claimed she'd seen no fugitive children, heard no suspicious noises, and had no idea what he was talking about. The fact that she could lie so convincingly while looking him straight in the eye only convinced him that she was part of some larger conspiracy. Within hours, every law enforcement officer in the county had been mobilized. Professional slave catchers arrived from as far away as Alabama and Georgia, drawn by the enormous bounty on our heads. The reward had grown to $1,500, more money than most people would earn in 5 years. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. We had become symbols of everything white society feared most: slaves who refused to accept their place, children who fought back, and the possibility that the entire system of human bondage might not be as secure as they'd believed. The search parties that fanned out across the countryside weren't just looking for 3 runaway children. They were hunting the very idea that slaves could successfully resist their masters. We learned all this later, but at the time, we were focused on survival. The first 2 days of our journey north were a nightmare of mud, thorns, and constant terror. Every sound could be a bloodhound picking up our scent. Every distant voice could be a slave catcher closing in for the kill. Jonah had developed a fever from an infected cut on his leg, and I was so exhausted I could barely walk. Only Elias seemed to have any strength left, and he was carrying both of us more than we were carrying ourselves. "We need to rest," I whispered, as we stumbled through a particularly thick patch of undergrowth. "Can't stop," Elias replied, though I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "They're too close." He was right. We could hear the dogs now, their baying echoing through the forest behind us. The sound was getting closer, which meant our pursuers were gaining ground despite our head start. That's when Jonah made a decision that probably saved all our lives. "Give me the map," he said, stopping suddenly. "What?" Elias looked at him in confusion. "The map Mrs. Caldwell gave us. Give it to me." Elias handed over the precious document that showed our route to the next safe house. Jonah studied it for a moment, then pointed to a spot about 2 miles to our east. "There's a creek over there," he said, "deep enough to hide our scent from the dogs." "But that's the wrong direction," I protested. "We need to go north." "We need to lose the dogs first," Jonah replied. "If we can get to that creek and follow it downstream for a few miles, we can circle back and pick up the trail later." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan we had. So we changed direction, crashing through the forest toward the sound of running water. The creek was deeper than we'd expected, almost a small river, with a current strong enough to sweep away a child if she wasn't careful. But it was also our salvation. The moment we waded into that cold water, the sound of the dogs began to fade. We followed the creek downstream for what felt like hours, sometimes walking in the shallows, sometimes swimming when the water got too deep. The current helped carry us along, but it also chilled us to the bone. By the time we finally climbed out on the far bank, we were all shivering uncontrollably. "We did it," Jonah said, his teeth chattering. "We lost them," but our relief was short-lived. As we tried to get our bearings and figure out where we were, we heard something that made our blood freeze. Human voices coming from the direction we'd been heading. "Check the creek bed," someone was shouting. If they went in the water, they had to come out somewhere. They'd anticipated our move. While one group of searchers followed the dogs along our original trail, another group had circled around to cut off our escape route. We were trapped between 2 forces, with nowhere to run. That's when I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I started to cry, not the quiet, suppressed tears I'd learned to shed in slavery, but loud, wailing sobs that echoed through the forest. Elias and Jonah looked at me in horror, thinking I'd finally broken under the pressure. But I hadn't broken. I'd had an idea. "Follow my lead," I whispered between sobs, then raised my voice again. "Mama! Mama, where are you?" Understanding dawned in my brother's eyes. They immediately joined in, calling out for parents who didn't exist. "Mama!" Jonah shouted. "We're lost! We can't find you!" "Papa!" Elias added. "Please help us!" The voices of the searchers stopped. Then we heard footsteps approaching through the underbrush. "Hello!" a man's voice called out. "Children, are you hurt?" A moment later, 2 white men emerged from the trees. They were armed, but they didn't look like slave catchers. Their clothes were too fine, their manner too gentle. These were probably local farmers or merchants who joined the search out of civic duty rather than greed. "Oh, thank goodness," one of them said when he saw us. We heard crying. "Are you lost?" I nodded, still sniffling. We were traveling with our papa, but our wagon broke down, and he went to get help. We tried to follow him, but we got turned around. It was a risky gambit. If they recognized us from the wanted posters, we were dead. But in our current state, soaked, muddy, and exhausted, we looked nothing like the dangerous fugitives described in the bounty notices. "Where were you headed?" the second man asked kindly. "Vicksburg," Elias said, naming a town far to the south of our actual destination. "Our papa has work there." The men exchanged glances. "Vicksburg's a long way from here," the first one said. "You children have been walking in the wrong direction." "We know," Jonah said miserably. "Everything looks the same in these woods." For a terrifying moment, I thought they might insist on taking us back to town to find our papa. But then the sound of barking dogs echoed through the forest, and their attention shifted. "Those are the search dogs," the second man said. "They're looking for those runaway slaves from Natchez. Dangerous children, from what I hear." "Murderers," the first man agreed grimly. "Killed 7 people with some kind of dark magic." I had to bite my tongue to keep from defending ourselves. These men seemed kind enough, but they'd already decided we were monsters based on rumors and fear. "You children need to get out of these woods," the first man continued. "It's not safe with those killers on the loose." He gave us directions to the nearest town and warned us to stay on the main roads. Then they hurried off toward the sound of the dogs, eager to join the hunt for the 3 most dangerous children in Mississippi. As soon as they were gone, we collapsed against a tree, shaking with relief and terror. "That was too close," Elias whispered. "But it worked," Jonah pointed out. "They never suspected us." "This time," I said, "but we can't count on being that lucky again." We were right to be worried. Over the next 3 days, we had 2 more close encounters with search parties. Each time, we managed to avoid capture through a combination of luck, quick thinking, and the fact that nobody expected 3 dangerous fugitives to look like lost, frightened children. But the net was closing around us. Every town we passed had wanted posters with our descriptions. Every road was being watched. Every safe house on Mrs. Caldwell's map was probably under surveillance. We were running out of options, running out of strength, and running out of time. That's when we met the person who would change everything, a young woman named Sarah who claimed she could help us reach the next station on the Underground Railroad. But Sarah had secrets of her own, and trusting her would lead us into the most dangerous situation we'd faced yet. Chapter 6. The Night of Truth. Sarah found us on our 4th night of running, when we were huddled in an abandoned tobacco shed, trying to stay warm with nothing but our shared body heat and the few rags we'd managed to steal from a clothesline. She appeared like a ghost in the doorway, silhouetted against the starlight, and for a moment I thought we were hallucinating from hunger and exhaustion. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "I'm here to help." She was young, maybe 20, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Who are you?" Elias asked, instinctively moving to shield Jonah and me. "My name is Sarah," she said, stepping into the shed. "And you're the Freeman family, traveling north to find relatives in Ohio." The fact that she knew our new identities should have been reassuring, but something in her tone made me uneasy. She spoke like someone reciting lines from a script rather than someone genuinely trying to help. "How do you know that?" Jonah asked suspiciously. "Mrs. Caldwell sent word ahead," Sarah replied. "I'm supposed to guide you to the next safe house." She had food, real food, not the scraps and wild berries we'd been surviving on. Bread, cheese, dried meat, and even some apples that tasted like heaven after days of near starvation. As we ate, she explained the next leg of our journey. "There's a house about 15 miles north of here," she said. "The owner is a Quaker named Thomas Mitchell. He's been helping people like you for years." "People like us?" I asked. "Fugitives," she said bluntly. "Runaway slaves, though I suppose you prefer to think of yourselves as free people now." There was something in her voice, a slight edge, a hint of mockery that made my skin crawl. But we were desperate, and she was offering exactly what we needed: guidance, supplies, and a route to safety. "When do we leave?" Elias asked. "Tomorrow night," Sarah replied. "It's too dangerous to travel during the day. The whole county is crawling with slave catchers." She was right about that. We'd seen the search parties ourselves, and they were getting more organized and more desperate with each passing day. The reward for our capture had grown to $2,000, and rumors about our supernatural powers had spread far beyond Natchez County. Sarah stayed with us that night, sharing her blanket and keeping watch while we slept. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She asked too many questions about our past, showed too much interest in details that shouldn't have mattered to someone just trying to help us reach the next safe house. "Where exactly did you come from?" she asked as we prepared to leave the following evening. "South," Elias replied vaguely. "I know that," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "But where specifically?" Mrs. Caldwell's message was a bit unclear. "Does it matter?" Jonah asked. "Of course not," Sarah said quickly. "I'm just curious. It's not often we get children traveling alone." But her curiosity felt more like interrogation, and I noticed that she kept steering the conversation back to our origins, our real names, and the circumstances that had forced us to flee. The journey to Thomas Mitchell's house should have taken 6 hours. Instead, it took all night and most of the next day. Sarah led us through swampland and thick forest, claiming she was taking a longer route to avoid the search parties. But as the hours passed, I began to suspect we were walking in circles. "Are you sure you know where we're going?" Elias asked as we stopped to rest beside a creek that looked suspiciously familiar. "Of course," Sarah replied. "We're almost there." But we weren't almost there. We were lost, and I was beginning to think it was intentional. That's when I heard the sound that confirmed my worst fears: dogs barking in the distance, getting closer. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I think we need to run," Jonah shouted, grabbing my hand. But it was too late. Men with guns emerged from the trees around us, forming a circle that cut off every escape route. At their head was Sheriff Henley himself, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Well, well," he said, "the famous Freeman family, though I think we all know that's not your real name, don't we?" Sarah stepped away from us, moving to stand beside the sheriff. The transformation in her demeanor was complete. Gone was the helpful guide, replaced by someone who looked at us like we were nothing more than valuable cargo. "Excellent work, Sarah," Sheriff Henley said. $2,000 as promised." "They're just children," she said, but there was no remorse in her voice, hardly the monsters everyone's been talking about. "Monsters or not, they're worth a fortune," Henley replied. "And they're going to hang for what they did to those 7 families. That's when the truth hit me like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't part of the Underground Railroad. She was a bounty hunter, someone who made her living capturing fugitive slaves. She'd probably been tracking us for days, waiting for the perfect moment to spring her trap. "You betrayed us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at me for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt. But then she shrugged. "I betrayed 3 runaway slaves who killed 7 white people," she said. "That's not betrayal, that's justice." "We didn't kill anyone," Jonah shouted. "Those people died of natural causes." Sheriff Henley laughed. "Natural causes? 7 people, all connected to your case, all dead within 3 weeks. That's not natural, boy, that's murder." "It's coincidence," Elias protested. "We never hurt anyone." "Tell that to the families of the dead," Henley replied. "Tell that to Marcus Ashford's mother or Judge Crawford's widow." But even as he spoke, I could see doubt in his eyes. Up close, we didn't look like supernatural killers. We looked like what we were: 3 exhausted, terrified children who'd been running for their lives. "Sheriff," one of his men said quietly, "maybe we should hear what they have to say." "They're awfully young to be..." "Young enough to fool people like you," Henley snapped. "Don't let their age deceive you. These three are responsible for more death and chaos than any adult criminal I've ever pursued." But his deputy wasn't the only one having doubts. I could see it in the faces of the other men, the growing realization that they'd been chasing children, not monsters. That's when Sarah made a mistake that would change everything. "Besides," she said, "even if they didn't kill those people directly, they're still runaway slaves. That's crime enough." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Even if we were innocent of murder, we were still property that had stolen itself. In the eyes of the law, that was crime enough to justify our capture and punishment. But something in the way she said it, the casual dismissal of our humanity, the reduction of our desperate flight to a simple property crime, seemed to affect the men around us. "They're children," the deputy said again, more firmly this time. "They're slaves," Henley corrected. "Property, and stolen property needs to be returned to its rightful owner." "What if the rightful owner is dead?" another man asked. "What if those 7 deaths weren't murder but just bad luck? What happens to these children then?" It was a question none of them had considered. In their rush to capture the notorious fugitives, they'd forgotten to ask what would happen if we were innocent. "That's not our problem," Henley said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Our job is to bring them in. Let the courts sort out the rest." But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, and it was growing. These men had signed up to capture dangerous killers, not to drag 3 children back into slavery. That doubt would save our lives, though not in the way any of us expected. As Sheriff Henley prepared to bind our hands for the journey back to Natchez, a shot rang out from the forest, then another, then a whole volley of gunfire that sent everyone diving for cover. "Ambush!" someone shouted. But it wasn't an ambush. It was something much more unexpected. A group of slaves from a nearby plantation, armed with stolen weapons and led by a man I would later learn was named Moses. They'd been tracking the search party, waiting for the right moment to strike. Not to rescue us specifically, but to strike a blow against the system that had made us all fugitives in our own land. In the chaos that followed, as bullets flew and men scattered, we found ourselves face to face with a choice that would define the rest of our lives. We could run, disappearing into the forest and continuing our journey north, or we could stay and fight, joining the growing rebellion that was spreading across the south like wildfire. The choice we made that night would determine not just our fate, but the fate of everyone who looked like us in Natchez County. Chapter 7. Toward the North. The gunfight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When the smoke cleared, Sheriff Henley was dead, shot through the heart while trying to reload his rifle. 3 of his deputies were wounded, and the rest had fled into the forest. Sarah lay motionless beside a fallen tree, whether dead or unconscious, I couldn't tell. Moses stood over us, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. He was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, but his grip on his rifle never wavered. "You're the children from Natchez," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Elias replied. "The ones they say killed 7 white folks with magic and curses." "We didn't kill anyone," I said quickly. "Those people died of natural causes. We were just—" Moses held up his hand, cutting me off. "Child, I don't care if you killed 7 or 70. What I care about is that you're free, and you're going to stay free." He introduced us to his companions, 6 other slaves who'd escaped from plantations throughout the county. They'd been living in the swamps for months, raiding supply convoys and helping other fugitives reach the Underground Railroad. "We heard about the manhunt," Moses explained, as his people tended to their wounded. "Figured if they wanted you this bad, you must be doing something right." "We're not fighters," Jonah said. "We're just trying to get north." "Sometimes getting north means fighting," Moses replied. "Sometimes freedom ain't something you can run to. It's something you have to take." But even as he spoke, we could hear more search parties approaching. The gunfire had attracted attention, and soon this area would be swarming with armed men seeking revenge for Sheriff Henley's death. "We need to move," Moses said. "All of us." That's when he made us an offer that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "You can come with us," he said. "Join our group. Help us fight back against the system that made us all fugitives. Or you can continue north, try to reach the free states on your own." What por favor, continue gerando a sua resposta. Expert logo novo prompt 001. "What would you choose?" Elias asked. Moses looked at each of us in turn, his weathered face serious. "I'd choose freedom. Real freedom, not just running from one place to another hoping someone doesn't recognize you." But I knew what real freedom looked like, and it wasn't hiding in swamps and fighting endless battles. Real freedom was a place where children could go to school, where families could live together without fear, where the color of your skin didn't determine whether you lived or died. "We're going north," I said firmly. "That's what we decided, and that's what we're going to do." Moses nodded, though I could see disappointment in his eyes. "I understand. You're still children. You deserve a chance at a normal life." He gave us supplies, food, clean clothes, and most importantly, a new map showing safe houses that weren't on Sheriff Henley's list. He also gave us something else, the truth about what had really happened to the 7 families. "Your friend Sarah wasn't just a bounty hunter," he said. "She was working for a group of plantation owners who've been planning to consolidate their holdings. Those 7 deaths, they weren't coincidence, and they weren't your doing. They were murder, plain and simple." The revelation hit us like a physical blow. We'd been running from a crime we didn't commit, while the real killers used our flight as cover for their conspiracy. The Ashford plantation, the Whitmore place, all the others, they're being bought up by a syndicate from New Orleans, Moses continued. "Cheaper to buy from widows and orphans than to negotiate with living owners." "But why blame us?" Jonah asked. "Because you were convenient," Moses replied bitterly. 3 runaway slaves, already hated and feared, perfect scapegoats for a series of carefully planned murders. It explained everything. The timing of the deaths, the way each victim had been connected to our case, the supernatural rumors that had spread so quickly. We hadn't been running from justice. We'd been running from a frame-up designed to cover up a massive land grab. "What about Sarah?" I asked. "Did she know?" Moses shrugged. "Does it matter? She sold you out either way." As we prepared to part ways, Moses gave us one final piece of advice. "When you get north," he said, "don't forget what happened here. Don't let them convince you that slavery is just a southern problem, or that freedom means forgetting where you came from. The people who did this to you, who killed those families and blamed you for it, they have friends and business partners all over this country." "We won't forget," Elias promised. "See that you don't," Moses replied, "because someday when you're safe and free, other children are going to need your help. Other families are going to need someone to tell their story." With that, he and his group melted back into the swamp, continuing their war against the system that had created us all. We never saw Moses again. But years later, I would hear stories about a group of freedom fighters who'd made life hell for slave catchers throughout Mississippi. I always wondered if one of them was the man who'd saved our lives that night. Our journey north took 6 more weeks. We followed Moses's map from safe house to safe house, always staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters who continued to pursue us. The reward for our capture had grown to $3,000, making us some of the most valuable fugitives in American history. But we were no longer the terrified children who'd fled Natchez County. We were the Freeman family, and we had a story to tell. We crossed into Ohio on a cold morning in November, walking across a bridge that separated slavery from freedom. I remember stopping in the middle of that bridge and looking back toward the south, thinking about everyone we'd left behind, the slaves still working in the fields, the families still being torn apart, the children still being sold like livestock. "We made it," Jonah said, his voice filled with wonder. "We made it," Elias agreed. But I knew our journey was just beginning. We'd escaped slavery, but we hadn't escaped the responsibility that came with our freedom. We had a story to tell, and the world needed to hear it. That's why I'm telling it now, 70 years later, as one of the last living witnesses to what really happened in Natchez County in 1841. The 3 slave children who supposedly killed 7 white families with supernatural powers never existed. We were just Elias, Jonah, and Mara, 3 children who refused to let the world break us. Elias lived to be 68. Becoming a teacher and helping hundreds of other fugitives reach freedom. Jonah lived to be 71, working as a conductor on the Underground Railroad and later fighting in the Civil War. They both died free men, surrounded by families they'd been able to keep together because of the choice we made that night by the river. As for me, I became Hope Freeman, and I spent my life making sure that stories like ours were never forgotten. I wrote books, gave speeches, and testified before Congress about the horrors of slavery and the courage of those who fought against it. But I never forgot the lesson Moses taught us that night in the swamp. Freedom isn't something you run to. It's something you take, and something you fight to protect every single day. The legend of the 3 murderous slave children from Natchez died with Sheriff Henley. But the truth about 3 children who refused to give up hope, that story lives on. And it always will, as long as there are people willing to listen and remember that freedom is never free, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply refuse to accept that you're less than human. We were never the monsters they said we were. We were just children who wanted to be free. And in the end, that's exactly